Okay, good evening, everyone. This is the July 13th, 2021 Election Commissioners meeting. We are starting at 5:35 p.m. Let's begin with a roll call and attendance. So starting with the chair, Zoe.
Here.
Vice Chair Jim.
Here.
Clerk Mark.
Here.
And Bev.
Here.
Okay, so all commissioners are present. First item of business is vote to accept the meeting minutes from the prior meeting. This was the June 29th meeting, and they've been circulated to you. If everyone's all right with it, we can entertain a motion to accept the minutes.
I'll vote to accept the minutes.
Okay, I have a motion to accept the minutes from Bev. Do I have a second? Okay, a second from Mark.
I have discussion. I have no objection with anything in there. Just I think it needs to be cleaned up a little bit in terms of spelling, spacing, and stuff like that. So which could probably be done on a spell checker of some kind.
Okay. All right. So I guess is that a friendly amendment?
Yeah.
Just to run a spell checker on it before accepting.
Yeah. No complaint about content.
Okay. So friendly amendment by Jim, just to do a spell check on it. Any vote on the motion to accept the minutes?
Aye.
Okay. All those in favor indicate by saying aye. I have an aye from Jim.
Aye.
Okay. Any nays? Okay. Hearing none, the meeting minutes are accepted 4-0. Okay, moving to the next item on the agenda, new business, subsection A, discussion of proposal by Commissioner Jim Pope for polling locations for 2021 municipal elections, consisting of the following. Item 1, open as many polling locations in each district as necessary and provide each polling location with a duplicate set of voter check-in books. 2, inform candidates to have poll watchers at all polling locations in the city, be alert for people they know are voting in an illegal manner or a logical location, example, a long way from where they live. 3, inform candidates of the legal ramifications of having their supporters vote twice and encouraging voters to do so. 4, instruct poll workers to watch for a significant number of people voting in an illegal manner or illogical location. 5, in the event a voter casts ballots in multiple locations on election day, have poll workers or watchers call the elections office. Upon receipt of the call, 2 election commissioners would be dispatched, 1 to each of the polling locations in the district. 6, upon arrival, each commissioner via mobile phone would audit the voter list to see if voters casted double, triple, or multiple ballots. In the event of illegal voting, the commissioners would remain at the polling location or instruct poll workers and check on future voters who are voting illogically. And 7, after the polls close and upon suspicion of a problem, the election commission would audit the voter list in questionable districts, with it only mattering if the number of fraudulent votes exceeded the winning or losing margin of any candidate. So that's agenda item A. I guess we'll open it up to discussion. We have no registered speakers on this item from the public, but I do have the city solicitor, though, who is available to speak on this item.
Okay. You'd like me to start by explaining how it came to this?
Yeah, sure, Jim.
Okay. Sure. Basically, I gave it a great deal of thought about all the blowback we were getting, which I thought much of it was perfectly justified. And I realized that what we're trying to do is keep people from voting more than once. And then I realized that that's probably not going to happen. There may be occasional people who do it, but we're encouraging people to vote through absentee voting and through mail-in voting. It'd be a whole lot easier to organize fraud that way than to try to get your people to go to the polls more than once. And so I think we're tilting at windmills. Now it's the example I came up with is we're not coming up with a system to keep elephants from trampling the voters at the polls because we know that's not going to happen. And I really don't think that any candidate is going to try to organize any significant number of people to go and vote twice. And So I don't think we ought to be putting a huge amount of effort into try to preventing it. And when we can put our effort into making it easier for people to vote, provide is not, no, in here it says twice, uses twice a couple times when my original one said as many as needed. It doesn't matter how many we set up. Now it's a logistical difficulty because we have to produce duplicate voter lists. The elections office ends up having to get more poll workers, et cetera, et cetera. But, we normally provide for a lot of polls anyway, poll workers anyway, in 33 different precincts. So I think we ought to not focus on something that's probably not going to happen and try to come up with something, multiple voting locations, which is going to make it easier for people to vote. Is going to deal with what we've heard from people about coming across the river, et cetera, et cetera. And the things I listed there as to what we would do if we detected illegal voting, I don't think we would have to implement, but we have to have something in place just in case it happens. And if I were a candidate and I were trying to do this, knowing that it would be, at the end of the day, it could be audited because all you have to do is compare the books. So we would know if there are multiple votes. And if people are coming to a polling place, for example, in my District 4, if somebody at the high school started getting a lot of people from the other side of the river, that might raise suspicion. They might be there. They might work in Lowell. We're not going to tell them they can't vote, but we could take note of it and we could check on it almost immediately. So again, my whole rationale is, let's not fight a battle that isn't there. Let's fight the battle that is there, and the battle that is there is getting enough polling places so people can vote in this election. That's enough for me. That's pretty short for an ex-professor.
Okay, Jim, thanks. Regarding your proposal, I did reach out to the LHS Associates regarding item 3D. And I did speak with the president of LHS Associates, Jeff Silvestra. He was not available to participate tonight, but he did provide several statements that I can mention, especially when it comes to item D.
Yeah,
But
Elliot, I'm the one that proposed that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, for D.
Yeah, but I also did sort of discuss with Jeff, the president, Jeff Silvestri, Jim's proposal, item 3A. And Jeff indicated that given that there are several issues at play with the proposal, Jim, one of them being the danger of voter intimidation, not to mention administration issues relative to the double voting issues and things of that nature. And Jeff Silvestri indicated that your proposal, LHS Associates wouldn't calibrate its machines or participate in sort of an election that went under this kind of system. And the reason for that is that if they did, they would be decertified by the Massachusetts Secretary of State's office from future Massachusetts elections, just because of the issues in the proposal relative to double voting and the dangers that would be posed with voter intimidation and the like. And,
I don't understand the voter intimidation part.
Well, part of the issue is that we would be asking the candidates to have poll watchers at the location observe or attempt to observe illegal voting. And
There should be anyway. There should be anyway.
well, no. Poll watchers are the procedure is that poll watchers are they don't look for illegal voting. They can challenge voters, but there's a specific procedure relative to that poll workers have to follow. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, I don't mean to interrupt. I was just going to say, if I could jump in, I mean, obviously, everyone involved is looking to address some of the issues that have been raised, and I understand that's obviously the context in which these suggestions were brought forward, and I'm sure a lot of thought was put into them. However, I have been in touch with the Secretary of State's office, and from our standpoint, the law department standpoint, we had also sort of right away flagged the problem that this could lead to voter intimidation. It was flagged. If I could just finish, it was also an issue that was in fact flagged by the Secretary of State's office. I think as Elliot was starting to explain, the role of a poll worker is quite specific, but to suggest that a poll worker participate and engage in the items listed below would be concerning. It would be problematic. There's also other issues in general. So we did share with the Secretary of State's office the proposal that was sent forward by Commissioner Pope, and again, the goal here is to that whatever we do, to make sure that it's going to be workable, and that it gets us to where we want to be and where we need to be. Among the issues that the Secretary of State's office flagged in this is that if a voter were to vote twice, there's really, which could happen under this system, that it would really potentially result in the necessity of having a whole new election, which frankly is exactly why as we began this process, and what was originally proposed was the single polling location in a district. It was to guard against votes that once made, you cannot pull them back. There is no way of doing it under these circumstances, which is what would trigger the need for a new election, arguably. So the items that Elliot had referenced with respect to LHS were also flagged by the Secretary of State's office, as well as by the law department. I don't know, what the general interest of the board is in say pursuing all or even some of these, but if there is, then we can continue to have sort of a more detailed discussion about it.
Could I respond? There's absolutely nothing in here about intimidation. There's nobody would ever have to say anything to a voter. And make sure to distinguish between a poll worker and a poll watcher. Poll worker is somebody we hire to work the polls. A poll watcher is just somebody a candidate has to watch the polls, just to make sure that nothing untoward seems to be happening. And if you at least read it, what I've written is, if a poll worker thinks that something's going on, he or she does not say anything to the voter. He or she calls the election office, and the election office dispatches one or more of us to go and check to see if there's been duplicate voting going on. It could go on, but let's face it, if I were going to try to cheat the polls, I wouldn't do this. I'd go and I'd get a bunch of people that send in absentee ballots and weren't planning on voting, get them to ask for them, and I'd fill them out for them and send them in. Same with early voting. The only difference is, in this case, you'd know if somebody was cheating. If somebody was cheating through absentee balloting or mailing voting, you couldn't tell. So, but there's nothing in here about intimidation. Nobody has to say anything to any voter.
Right.
So, but you're right. If somehow there's 1,000 duplicate votes that happen, any more than I think a herd of elements is going to run over the polling place.
Jim, I think you, Commissioner Pope, I think you, we lost a connection.
Yeah, Jim, you broke out there for a second.
Okay, that's because my
But if I
Well,
may respond, only if you're done.
Well, I don't know. My main point is there's no intimidation because nobody has to say anything to any voter. And the only case where the system would fall down is if there were a large number of people voting more than once. And I just don't think that's going to happen. First of all, this is not an election where the parties are involved. It's not an election where the state or town or city organizations are involved. It's just the candidates. And I think the candidates have a lot more to be worried about than organizing massive vote fraud. And as I say, if I were a candidate and going to do that, I'd be making sure that I got a hold of a bunch of early voting or mail-in voting and absentee ballots and sent those in. That's not traceable. This will be traceable.
No, and again, if I could just speak to some of this. First of all, early voting, mail-in voting, these systems have been tried and true. And in fact, we even had a recount in the city, and the results were essentially on the money. But to speak to it as a larger issue, there is no evidence that mail-in voting or early voting is resulting in any voting fraud. The voting fraud that does raise its head in this particular case is in fact having a system set up whereby individuals could be legally sort of registered to vote in more than one polling location on election day. And if somebody did take advantage of that situation, the part of the concern there, the real problem that we would be facing is that once there is evidence of that, it really calls into question the legitimacy of the results, which is not what obviously anyone here wants to see. As far as the voter intimidation, again, the language and I really don't want to sort of go back and forth on it. We may frankly not agree, but I do think it's worth mentioning that the concerns that the law department has with this language, quote, inform candidates to have poll watchers at polling locations in the city, be alert for people they know are voting in an illegal manner or illogical location, example, a long way from where they live, or part 4, instruct poll workers to watch for a significant number of people voting in an illegal manner or illogical location. The objectively speaking, I think that this certainly does raise issues with respect to voter intimidation. It's not to say in any degree that that's what was intended by it. Obviously not, but that certainly is something that could be it could result in that. And so again, I don't know what the and by the way, I just want to note that while I think Elliot had mentioned at the outset that there was Part D, an invitation to LHS associates for a representative to speak, while they are unable to attend, with us this evening is the expert Professor Nate Persily, who is coming to us from his vacation in Iceland. And Professor Persily is here if there are some questions that the commission may have on some of these different issues. He would do his best to help us all understand whatever issues are being brought up. So what I was and there is Professor Persily. Thank you, Professor. So what I was going to say is I don't know. I would turn it over to the Election Commission. I don't know. Is this a proposal that that the commission wants to discuss further, or what the intent is. And so I just wanted to at least get those comments out. And I would turn it back to the commission. Thank you.
Let me just say that the parts that I wrote here were not intended to be absolutely firm. But my main point is we don't need to be worrying about it. And I mean, the fact that you say there's no evidence that absentee voting and the like causes fraud, I'm not disagreeing. I'm not against that. But what I'm saying is I don't think this is going to cause any fraud either. And but I think we need something in place so that we don't say, okay, y'all come and vote. We do have some procedures in place in case we detect some stuff. And if our vendor can't handle it, why in the heck is he our vendor? You know, let's get a vendor who can handle it. Now they're supposed to be working for us, not us for them. But you know, we've got this situation. I see a lot of people on here who've talked in the past about in previous meetings about this one voting place per district. And they raise a lot of good objections and a lot of perfectly legitimate objectives. And this is just an attempt to address that. And I haven't heard any counter proposals to address it and get more places open. And the fact that Professor Persley decided to cut up our precincts is the whole root of the problem. And we have to deal with it. I mean, that's done. That's done. We have to deal with it. And this is one way to deal with it.
If I may be heard, what Professor Persley had done is to follow the consent decree, which required that the city of Lowell create 8 districts. At the time that this language was agreed to, it was assumed that we would have the census data available to us. The professor does not draw the precincts for us. That is not done by the professor. That would be done more administratively. And so what has happened with the 8 districts is exactly what the parties had agreed to do under the consent decree. As far as again, the proposal that was first presented to the Election Commission and was in fact adopted by the Election Commission was the centrally located polling locations. Since that happened, the City Council also has since forwarded a home rule petition along with a handful of other communities. And if that home rule petition is approved, then residents of Lowell, voters of Lowell will be able to take advantage of early voting, in-person early voting for up to 10 days, mail-in voting, as well as the use of drop boxes, which again creates additional opportunities to vote. And really opens the door to voter convenience, which is something that again we fully support. When we administratively implemented early voting throughout the city, Lowell was recognized for having as many locations as really any community out there, which is why we were recognized by the Secretary of State's office in those efforts that went above and beyond. So, but the problem that we face here is a rather unique problem, and it is because of the unavailability of the census, and also our legal inability to create precincts. So there's as has been mentioned, there is currently no legal way to do it. What has been discussed is having amending our consent decree, which we're happy to discuss that, as well as potentially pursuing another home rule petition, and we're happy to discuss that. But absent that, there is no legal way of administering this election, other than what really has been presented, which is why when we reached out to the Secretary of State's office, to the Secretary of State himself, he was in agreement that the way of doing it is the way that it was presented to the Election Commission and adopted by the Election Commission. And again, since then, we have now greatly enhanced voter opportunity through early voting, mail-in voting, drop boxes.
So what you're saying is that is the way we're going to do it.
No, I'm just telling you what our conversations have been with respect to the Secretary of State's office, as well as the realities. What I also said is that we're happy to discuss and walk through some of these other suggestions that have been raised, namely amending the consent decree or pursuing home rule. There are obviously going to be issues with both of those, and we're happy to lay that out before the Election Commission.
I have a question. Was there anything in the consent decree that
Jim,
required us to ignore precincts?
Jim, Zoe had a question first. So
Okay, I'm sorry.
I recognize the chair first. Go ahead. So.
Okay, I recognize you. Thank you. The question that I had, Christine, thank you so much for recapping that, by the way, was since the consent decree is silent on this issue, when before the one district, one polling place discussion came about, did we ever go back to the plaintiffs and speak about this to see if there are other options, or did we just so that's the first question. Have the plaintiffs been considered or reached out to see if they are willing to make that amendment already?
And so is the question whether we have spoken to the plaintiffs as to their willingness to pursue an amendment to the consent decree? Is that the question?
Prior to the one district and one polling place.
Actually, my understanding is that this was sent to the plaintiffs' counsel, and we hadn't heard any objections. Is that accurate? To Elliot Beloso?
I'm not sure on that, but in terms of the administration of the election, again, looking at all the challenges and the fact that we don't have wards and precincts, to rely upon, sort of the system that was developed really, again, with the lack of census data and everything, is really the only way we can administer it.
That's not my question.
Right. So I think the answer to the question is, I mean, we can double check with them. But as far as pursuing an amendment to the consent decree, we have had initial discussion with them. I was hoping to have a further discussion today, and they have their counsel has no objection to pursuing it. However, there are still issues that we would need to iron out, and there is a timeline that is going to be triggered if anything like this is pursued. And then there's logistical questions. For example, if you were to take a district and subdivide and create these sub-districts, District 1A and 1B, and again, assuming we have satisfied the legal authority and have obtained the legal authority to do that, one of the things that, if it was through the consent decree, that we would have to have a discussion with the plaintiffs on is how would that happen? How would a district be divided? Would it be divided? Because whatever system we use really should be used arguably for all of the districts to be consistent. Would you do it through population, based on population? Would you do it geographically, say like consider things like a river or heavily condensed neighborhood, traffic patterns? Would you do it just pure distance, which is something that has been discussed quite a bit, the distance between polling locations. And of course, any kind of change like that, if you were to take, say, District 4 and just divide that district in half, if you will, arguably you could be having, and you likely would have, more voters that would then have to go to the other side of the river to go and vote than what we have right now. Same with the Riley School as a centrally located voting location. If you were to divide up District 3, because so many people vote at the Riley, you might see the greatest number of voters having to then change location, which is not at all obviously what anybody really wants to see. But the point is that as we start to get further into the weeds as to the impact of some of these changes, they're not necessarily as clear cut. Also, I guess it should be noted that that some of the changes might not have any real impact. Impact meaning the type of impact that we're collectively looking to see. I mean, one example of that would be the Bailey and the Daly, who and they're located literally next door to one another. Similarly, the Green Elge and the Robinson are about a mile apart. And then when you consider voters that are in the Acre section of the city that had voted at Lowell High, voting now at the senior center would actually be more convenient, arguably. So there are those issues. With respect to the plaintiffs, I can say unequivocally that all of these other issues that we have brought before the council have always been presented to. So all of the home rule petitions, all of these recent types of discussions have all been brought to the plaintiffs' council, and where we have, collectively endeavored to work together to come to a resolution.
So thank you again for that, Christine. So what I would like to do now is, before we go into more further discussion, I would like for us to take the speakers and have them speak now, and then after we hear them speak, then we can now continue and decide whether or not we're going to move forward with Jim's proposal. Okay.
So the speakers that we have listed here, they asked to speak. Well, two have asked to speak on item 3B. And the others have asked to speak on item 3C. So if you wish to move outside of the order of the agenda, it'll require a motion to have, to address these items, ahead of 3A. So if there's a motion to that effect.
There's a motion.
Okay.
To 3B and 3C.
Okay. So, all right. So we have a motion by Zoe to have the speakers on items 3B and 3C speak out of turn. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Seconded by Bev. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Okay, those not in favor? Hearing none, motion passes. So for the registered speaker list, I have 6 people who have registered to speak. They will be called in the order that they have placed in the registration. The first would be Jeff Foster speaking on item 3B and 3C. So Jeff, I'd ask you to unmute.
Thanks so much. And commissioners, Madam Chair, thank you so much for again prioritizing this topic. Really appreciate your motion to reconsider so that we could have more robust discussion and hope we're able to take another step forward tonight. So real quick, my name is Jeff Foster. I live at 122 Humphrey Street in Lowell. And I'm also the executive director of Common Cause Massachusetts. We're very proud to join, along with so many other organizations and residents in Lowell, in opposition to the proposed plan to close polling locations. And I'm here tonight to share with you our opinion that the city does indeed have other legal options to consider here. With the counsel of our pro bono elections lawyer and a Common Cause board member, David Sullivan, who spent many years as general counsel to the Secretary of Commonwealth's Election Division, and then as the counsel to the state Senate, along with input recently from Michelle Tassinari, the current elections director at Secretary Galvin's office, we believe strongly that there is a way to achieve the shared goal of either keeping or increasing the number of polling locations this fall. Under state law, the city can draw new precincts to fit in the new districts using the 2010 census data, the same data used to create the new districts. State law also requires precincts to be drawn no larger than 4,000 residents, and that polling location administration is then determined by those precincts. If you consider the existing wards and precincts defunct, then you have de facto precincts in the new districts which greatly exceed the state's legal limit. Therefore, we believe the city has two options to consider here. Option one is to use the existing wards and precincts which are not congruent with the new districts to administer our elections and keep the same polling locations from last fall. We recognize that this comes with its risks, that clerical errors could occur because there would be multiple ballots needed for voters who live in the same precinct, but who would need to vote in different district contests. Option two, as was mentioned, would be for the city to divide the new districts in half to create sub-districts using the 2010 census data, which again, the city can do. In talking to Secretary Galvin's office, this seemed to be the option they encouraged. To accomplish this, special permission would be needed since the sub-districts would still be over the 4,000 legal limit, and we would need these to be immediately implemented in time for the fall elections. In our opinion, the city needs either an update to the consent decree with the lawsuit plaintiffs or a home rule petition to get the special permission needed here. It's important to note that we believe the same special permission will be needed to consolidate down to 8 polling locations because of the size of the new districts. Both options have their ups and downs as it relates to administration, educating the public, and the timeliness factor, but both are doable under law and make so much more sense than closing 40% of our polling locations. It's our opinion at Common Cause that option 2 is the best option, given its support from Secretary Galvin's office, and that it would actually result in an increase in polling locations this fall. We recognize that this needs to happen quickly, and we're committed to partnering with the city on making this happen. The decision does lie with you, the Elections Commission, and we appreciate your recent vote to reconsider and to hear this perspective tonight. In closing, I want to recognize that there is a perceived benefit to the logistics of election administration if you do consolidate, but I respectfully maintain that the cost is far too high a price to pay if it creates any new barriers between a single voter and their constitutional right to vote. Thank you. Director, I think
Elliot, you're on mute.
unmuted. Yep.
Apologies. So as indicated, Tara Hong is not on the call. She was next in line. Therefore, I'm going to move next to John Grossman. Is there a John Grossman?
Yep.
Yes, John Grossman is registered to speak on item 3B.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Jonathan Grossman. I live at 83 Varnum Ave in Lowell. I'm speaking in support of the idea of not decreasing the polling locations, similar to what other people have spoken about. I volunteer with 350 Mass, and I'm usually speaking when I speak publicly about how to address the climate crisis. Just as the climate crisis affects people in marginalized communities more and harder than it does people who are better off and have more power, so does reducing polling locations. The whole point of moving to districts was to increase involvement, especially of people with less power. And the city has agreed to that and voted for it. It's really important and it should be prioritized. reducing the number of polling locations, even if it does solve some other logistical problems, it does the opposite. It's the opposite of what people voted to do, and we should not do it. It might make it harder to manage the election. I recognize that, but we have to do the hard thing because that's what the city wants to do, and it's the right thing to do. Thank you.
Thanks, John.
Thank you, John. That concludes the speakers on Zoom. I'm now going to open it up for those who registered to speak in person. Yeah, I'm setting it up.
I'm from LTC. I'm just gonna take some down. I checked in.
Not on mute at this point. Okay. Sure. Okay, next up is Yoon Jun Choi. You're speaking on item 3C.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Yoon Joo Choi of 527 Protective Boulevard, and I'm the Executive Director of the Coalition for a Better Acre. Today, I'm here to speak in opposition to closing polling locations. First, I would like to acknowledge both the city staff and the election commission who are doing their best to run elections under difficult circumstances. I know we all want to make our elections as open and easy to access as possible, and we appreciate being able to work with you. Today, I would like to express our serious concerns that closing polling locations will result in some of our residents CBA serve for them to less likely to vote. Any change is difficult to communicate, especially with so little time left for translation and outreach. Many people do not know our election will be different this year. To add to that, reducing polling locations and changing polling locations, this will be a very difficult year for all of us. And we already have a lot of work ahead of us. We know there are no ideal solutions at this point. A letter was sent to you yesterday that presented two options that may be feasible for the Election Commission Elections Office to pursue that would prevent 40% reduction in polling locations. Please don't close the polling locations and make voting even harder. Closing the locations will disproportionately affect low-income people who are less likely to have car to travel further distances. We are especially concerned about District 4, which is long and narrow, which will result in people having to travel across the river from Centerville and up quite a distance from back central. We worry that these voters will just stay home. District 2 also presents a lot of issues for residents who live on the other side of the Bridge Street. For one of CBA's ambassador, who lives on Caroline Street, according to Google Maps, it would take her 17 minutes for her to walk from her house to Robinson School. In reality, for a 68-year-old woman with a heart condition, it would take 30+ minutes to walk up the hill of Robinson School. On a good weather day. We live in New England. We never know what the weather will be in early November. For these reasons, I would like to advocate for Election Commission to vote for one of the options that would not reduce number of polling locations. We appreciate the time and attention spent on this challenging issue. We know all of us want what is best for the voters of Lowell. Thank you.
Okay, I will now call Mary Torres as the next registered speaker.
Thank you for having the opportunity, both hybrid and both virtual and in person. And for opening this back up to review the original proposal and plan. You obviously have the letter that our partners put together, hopefully with the options that we presented. We can get that to you again. It goes over what I have notes on the back for me, but this is a letter that now roughly 20 organizations have signed on to and shows two options. Either with working with the wards and precincts that are already in place and having multiple ballots, or re-precincting with the 2010 data and having multiple polling locations available per district. So overall, we're just advocating, I'm sorry, I didn't even introduce myself, but I'll do that again, to keep polling locations open and have as much access as possible. Both of these options that are in the letter have received feedback from the Secretary of State's office that they're feasible. So it's important to note that we understand that there are options, and we want to make sure that the polling locations are covered. My name is Mary Torres. I work as Lowell Votes coordinator presently, and certainly we always want to work collaboratively as much as possible to get the word out and have access be available, and not to confuse voters as much as possible, considering that there might be changes.
Thank you.
Yes, you should have this letter if you don't.
The final registered speaker is Paul Gaudet. Paul Gaudet is the final registered speaker. He's speaking on item 3C.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Paul Gaudet. I live at 4 Berkeley Street in the Highlands of Lowell, and I belong to an organization called Merrimack Valley Project. It's a social justice organization that's been around for over 25 years, and we have chapters in Lowell, Lawrence, and Haverhill. And part of our mission is to promote civic engagement, especially by listening to the issues of concern of the member organizations that participate in MVP, Merrimack Valley Project. And so while we have not been able to formally endorse the letter that you have received with some recommendations about keeping existing polling stations open, we certainly in general support the concept of making voter access as open and free as possible, and feel that this is not a time to restrict to one polling place per district. So on their behalf, even though we formally have not endorsed the letter that you received, we would agree with the signatories, the CMAA and the CBA and Lowell Votes and some other organizations that signed on to that letter. We certainly support the spirit of it and recommend that you keep as many polling stations as we currently have, or expand it possibly, so that we maximize voter participation. That's about it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that closes out our registered speakers. So having concluded registered speakers, I believe we now move back to item 3A.
Before we do, can we just let the record that Elliot's gonna send the rest of the commissioners the letter that was sent? I think I'm the only person that received it.
Yes, I thought it was my understanding that the letter that Geoff had sent would have been sent to all the commissioners. If not, I will make sure it's forwarded to them. All right, hearing that, we are now moving back to item 3A of the agenda. So.
If I may,
Yeah, go ahead.
to the commission, I think it might be helpful if we walked through some of the time constraint issues that we're going to be dealing with as the commission considers any one of these proposals that have been discussed tonight. And if now is a good time to do that, I'm happy to begin to address some of those issues from an administrative standpoint to the commission. Or at a later time, whatever be preferred.
If the commissioners have no objections, I think now would be an appropriate time.
Yeah, I don't have an objection. Does anybody
Okay.
else?
No.
Yeah, that's cool.
Okay.
So some of the timing considerations that these issues raise, we have September 21 is our first effective election day date to meet. Any change to polling locations would have to be publicly posted, and individuals would have to be notified in writing. The posting date is September 1st of 2021. The statute is either silent or not specific in terms of when that written notice has to go out to residents that would be affected by polling location changes. In this case, everyone in the city would be receiving a notice. I believe in discussions with the interim election director, Elliot Veloso, that those notices have traditionally, he has sent them out. Elliot, could you just note how much advance notice typically we would give to residents about these changes?
Yeah, certainly. So when we have changed polling locations in the past, the most recent example that the commissioners may be aware of was when we changed it from the St. Louis School to the Green Hills Elementary School. We sent out that notice, the postcard notice, to all affected voters approximately about a month and a half prior to that. Obviously, we don't want to be sending out notice, close up to the election, because then, it endangers the risk of voters either not receiving it or not paying attention to it. So when we did the notice to Green Hill Elementary School, we planned that out at least 2 to 3 months prior. And, as part of the logistical process of getting the notice ready, you have to send out an RFQ, or request for quotes, to printers who are interested and things of that nature. And then, that sort of process. But that's sort of the time frame, at least in the recent past, that we've done for polling location changes.
Okay, so I have a question on that as we go through the timeline. I know this body in the past have discussed notices that are being sent out from the elections office. One of the questions that I put forth numerous times were the way in which we notify people. I know that previously in the past, we have done postcards as well as letter notification through the mailing system. I have asked numerous times about notification via electronic communication. I have been told that we were looking into it, and we've not really gotten an update. With that being said, especially with this being such a crucial time crunch that we have currently, how can we expedite when and how we're able to communicate electronically, 21st century, to people?
Well, as indicated, I spoke with, the manager's office and our emergency, coordinator regarding the use of text messages. And our text message system is currently only designed for emergency use. It's not designed to provide notice to, voters in the city. And, again, I have reached out to them. It's my understanding that, the systems that the city has for emergency text messages are not capable of providing that notice. And the other factor too is that it's Massachusetts General Law, chapter, I believe it's 54, section 23. I can double check that, but under state law, whenever we change polling location, the legal requirement is that we have to send out written mailed notice. That any other form of notice like email or electronic, while advantageous, is not recognized by the state as the legal
So
requirement.
it was always a booster too. It was always to bolster the information being put out there. It wasn't, my ask was not just to have one avenue of communication, it was to have many avenues of communication in order to ensure that everyone gets the information. So understanding that the text messaging was an emergency, that's the first time that we've actually clarified that.
Well, no,
because I know-
I did indicate it a couple of meetings ago that when I spoke with the city manager's office and Shad, the emergency coordinator, in the past, that the text message system was for emergencies only. It didn't have the
I
capacity
thought-
for it.
Yeah, I thought.
No, I did
You said,
indicate,
yeah, you said Phil Jeffroy, you were gonna reach out to him.
right, it was the man, yeah, he's with the manager's office. And then I also, he also, I believe, reached out to Shad, who is the emergency coordinator, because, it's through them that the text message system can be used.
That's fine.
And the indication that I was told is that, no, right now, the capability isn't present
It's
to
not.
use it that way.
Okay, so that's understandable, that it's no at this point. So email,
If-
phone and phone bank as well, like to send out information is unlikely.
Well, I don't know about.
If I could
Oh,
perhaps jump in with a suggestion. I mean, that kind of a system will be great. And one of the things that we could do, at least in the interim, is allow people to have something up on our webpage, go through social media, and encourage people to send into the election office any kind of electronic
Information. Right.
information and
That's
email.
exactly-
And from that, we would just create a general blanket email that will go out blind addresses. And so we can certainly start implementing something like that. As Elliot was saying, the notice that is the legal notice that we have to, that box that we've got to check is the legal notice, the one that needs to be mailed out. That's the one that we have translated. But in addition to that, as you had pointed out, having more means of communication only serves us better. Getting back to the, if I may, getting back to the time frame. So we would have to have that posted by September 1st. And what I wanted to at least alert commissioners and the public that that then typically voters that are affected would get that notice about a month and a half ahead, the actual written notice. What we'd be looking at in terms of fixed time frames that we would have to deal with is beyond September, that September 1st posting date. We'd also have to be mindful of the printer sending this information off to the printer. So the printer, to print and mail and check, at a minimum, is you're looking at a couple of weeks. Some of the other things that we would be doing that that Mr. Veloso, Attorney Veloso, had mentioned are things that they take time, but frankly, we could start them now and just have them running at the same time that we're doing other things. But we would have to have an RFQ that would go out to the printers. Would draft our notice. The draft of the notice could leave blank where the polling locations are going to be. We could work with translators on this sample notice, knowing that we're going to have to then insert the locations. And, in the past, in particular for the Khmer translations, those have taken one to 2 weeks. Reading the proofs, confirming the translation accuracy has also taken 1 to 2 weeks. But again, what we would be looking to do is to just be moving forward with all of those items as we would right now anyway. And so what we're looking at in terms of a conservative list of dates here would be around mid-August. These issues would have to be resolved. This would have to be heading off to the printer. Before we can do any of that, we then would have to have a legal means of doing if we were to pursue a split district, we would have to have the legal means to do that. And that could only happen either by the consent decree or by the home rule petition. Just to put some of this in perspective, as far as the home rule petition that established the 8 districts, that legislation took roughly 11 months to be signed into law. More recently, in May, there was a home rule petition to reduce the number of signatures for the district seats to 50. And that was promulgated by the city council. That has not yet reached a second reading. So we think if you were to pursue any path, that the advisable path really, and the more reliable path would be to have to pursue an amendment to the consent decree itself. In order to do that, we would have to have language that is acceptable to both parties. And again, it may seem fairly straightforward, but then you get into the question about how actually would a district potentially be subdivided into, part 1A and part 1B. So it would have to be reviewed by both parties. The council, we would obviously comply with our 48-hour notice with the council. We would have to hire, fund, and retain an expert to subdivide. And I think the commission would have to also really weigh in on administratively how that subdivision could be achieved. Would it be achieved, geographically, by population, by other means? Once that's set, we'd have an emergency motion to the federal court and seek to have the decision amended as soon as possible by agreement of the parties and by agreement of the court, obviously. The other issue to be mindful of in terms of making changes is, and this is something that the Secretary of State's office is also aware of, and that's the VRIS voter information system. So we would have to, if hypothetically districts were divided into 2, to then provide each district with 2 polling locations, and these polling locations divided would then guard against the issue of having multiple voting in 2 different polling locations. In order to do that, we would have to engage in a manual entry of these sub-district designations. Now, that has already been done thus far with respect to the 8 districts. And in order to do that, that took a month and a half of, and that was for a much smaller, is 25,000 voters. So in this case, we would really have to adjust that information for all roughly 64,000 registered voters. And hopefully that number would continue to increase in terms of the number of people registered to vote. So it's a process that's done on the state computers. They do not let us hire a company to come in and do it. And so that's just something else to be mindful of in terms of exploring the issue is the timeline. So what we'd really be looking at an absolute minimum is to have something at the printers by sometime in mid-August. And that would not allow for the type of, say, notice time that has been provided by this office, by the election office in the past, but mid-August would be what you were looking at. And so between now and mid-August, the other issues would need to be ironed out. Namely, what is the legal path, that opens the door to allowing us to create sub-districts, either the home rule or the consent decree, and then consideration of, is there sufficient time to go in and manually change all of that information. So I'm happy to answer any questions that that you might have, but I just wanted to lay out the timeframes that we need to kind of keep our eye on collectively.
I have a question on the safety of the voters coming in on election day to the one precinct, and there'll be long lines.
Well, the way, and we've spoken to LHS, the way we would set it up is that we would have, just like in normal polling locations, we would have multiple check-in stations. And because the polling location would be centered on one ballot, we would just have, one machine per check-in location, queued in and programmed to that ballot. And my understanding from LHS Associates and the Secretary of State's office is that our polling pads would be connected via Bluetooth, so they would update in real time. So voters would come to the polls, they would go into a space that's available in the checkout tables. The voter would check them in through the poll pad. And since we know that voter is voting in that district, so we don't have to worry about which ballot they're getting. They get the ballot, they mark it, they check out, and the checkout system with the poll pads, I understand, is it prints out a receipt. So it's a thermal printer, just like it would be on an early voting day. So the thermal printer would be at the checkout table and it prints out. So at the checkout table, the voter would go there, they'd find the receipt, check off the receipt, store it, and then the voter would put their ballot into the machine and it'd be counted. So in terms of lines, because we have these multiple check-in stations, there wouldn't be a line because voters would be able to just go, to these multiple stations and check in, regardless. So that's sort of to our advantage in the sense of we're not just simply restricted to one machine and one poll pad. We can set up multiple poll pads all queued in together so that they're all checking the same book. And then in real time, we'll be able to check in voters that way. And then the information will be accurate. Apparently, this is also done in Boston. So when Boston does, they have had poll pads for a while. And when they do early voting and, voting on election day, they Bluetooth connect their poll pads at a location so that they update in real time. So that way, that ensures that you ensure one person, one vote, but also prevents the formation of lines and things like that because people are just checking in as they come in.
I just worry about the safety of the voters. Will there be more police involvement? We only have one policeman
Right. Well,
in any one district.
Because we're using multiple check-in
Right.
stations, we're going to have multiple police officers, one checking in each location. And obviously, you know, in an election of this import, I would be in communication with LPD to ensure that we have the full complement of officers both in the morning and the evening. And that was always sort of in design when we were looking logistically at, you know, these polling locations. So that's sort of in terms, and additionally, just to add to that, in terms of safety, all of the centralized polling locations are pre-existing polling locations. So we've held multiple elections before. So we know that they are ADA compliant. We know the layout of the location, so we know how to set up these multiple check-in tables and sort of, we also, you know, did it through COVID. So I think for this election, we would do a similar setup in terms of voter flow. So voters flow in, they go to the check-in, you know, locations, which are linked so that, you know, you check in, so the voter lists are updated in real time. So we know people aren't double voting. They get their ballot, they go to their booth, they vote, they check out. And because the checkout will be easier because it's using the thermal printer, you won't have to wait in line long, because all you need to do is find the paper receipt, check off the receipt, store it, and the person's checked out. That has our paper trail. And then they can slide the ballot into the machine, which we know because that machine is coded to just one district. So we don't have to worry about multiple districts and multiple machines, because that's another challenge. You know, if we use our traditional polling locations, you need to have multiple machines to cover the multiple districts. And we may not even have enough machines to do it that way. And then once the ballot goes in, they'll be able to flow out through the exit, just like we did with COVID protocols. So the idea is that it's sort of like a single flow process, just like we did last year.
Thank you.
Thanks. I have a question. So just going back and taking a few notes of the time constraints or the time frame that the Solicitor O'Connor just mapped out for us, that puts into, you know, greater perspective about the time crunch that we're actually dealing with. It makes it that much harder to correct, I guess, correct the ship, right? So we're already in motion at this point with the one district and one polling location, which is why now I'm understanding what the resistance is to even looking at other options.
Right.
This is the main reason, right?
Yeah.
So my question then becomes, and she rightfully mentioned that the Elections Commission, if we were to you know, choose maybe the subdivision, that we would have to be involved. Like we would have to weigh into that discussion. And then the plaintiffs, I guess, for the consent decree would have to, the consent decree would have to be amended as well. So that would also cause for further communication. So what happened previously and what got us here, I feel is that the lack of communication, and where we were not, this body did not weigh in on the original one district and one polling place. We were basically told after the fact, and we were told this was the best way to go. Yes, it appears with everything at this point now, because of the time sensitivity, that this looks like it's the only way now. But previously, we did not weigh in. And then secondly, the reason why I asked the question originally of if the plaintiffs were also asked prior to this option being set forth, was that as well. So that communication was also lacking there too. So now we're in this conundrum. We're looking as though that's voter suppression when it's really not. It's a logistical issue. And we're still not, we're only after the fact getting the communication. So going out with this now, so my thought process now is, how do we get this information out to folks to have them understand that we are not trying to suppress people from voting? Because what a reduction of polling location on its face looks like is exactly that.
Mhm. Yeah, and,
If,
oh, yes, go ahead. Go ahead.
if I could jump in there, and so what originally drove the recommendation was that this is really the only legal option. Now, again, we can seek to change the law, but really what drove this was the fact that the
lack of
census
census.
data,
Yeah.
the census data, isn't in, and that was not expected. It's not what we were not what our understanding was. That being said, to your point, which is really kind of what this is all about, is really the critical point. Yes, this is not at all the consolidation of these polling locations was done for a very specific reason. But I think one of the things that we have to continue, and that everyone should continue to be mindful of, is that we are very optimistic that home rule petition is in fact going to be enacted into law. And if it is, that means that Lowell is just going to be one of a handful of communities that will be able to participate, where voters will be able to participate in early voting for up to 10 days. We already have a proven track record that when we've had early voting, we have had a really robust outreach to voters and made it as accessible as possible. But then also you have the mail-in voting and the drop boxes. And I think that those tools really cannot in any way be underestimated in terms of providing convenience to people who are going to go and vote, as opposed to going out on a single day to your polling location. So while I agree with you, the intent clearly is not to suppress the vote, and never has been. Just the opposite. All of the things that we have sort of collectively done over these many years. But that home rule petition that was passed unanimously by the council is something that not too many other communities are going to have. And it is, I think, a huge advantage to voters when you're looking at this question of, convenience and accessibility, and being able to get out as many votes as possible. One of the things actually that Professor Pearsley had shared with us is that anytime you change a voting system, you are going to be running into issues where, voters might find it confusing, which was also a concern of ours, but as well as for poll workers and the training. But voters might find it confusing, and as a result, they may just not exercise that right to vote. But the fact that we're pursuing and are very optimistic and are in fact expecting those early voting remedies, those things are very straightforward. They're not confusing. And one of the things that we'd like to do is, as soon as there is a decision, is to really begin, again, that sort of robust effort of collectively getting that word out, working with plaintiffs' counsel as well to spread the word, as well as other people that have spoken here tonight. I mean, in the past, Jeff has been a great partner to the election office in helping us get poll workers when he was at UTEC, and also helping to spread the word with respect to cards and advertisements of the upcoming election. Increasing the signage, which is something that we have done in the past and continue to do.
Something I would just also add to on the early voting front is that and we are very optimistic that the legislature will approve our special legislation to allow for early voting. What's great too is that last year when we implemented those changes to early voting, in-person early voting and the mail-in ballot, we had trackable metrics as to how successful it was. And I can speak from from the voters who spoke to this election office after 2020, as well as sort of our metrics, that holding early in-person voting at the Lowell Senior Center was deemed a great success, both in terms of accessibility and the parking. And certainly, you know, if the special legislation passes, and again, we're optimistic it does, we will certainly pursue strongly in-person early voting to ensure that we get the word out to citizens that, you know, this option is available, as well as look at, you know, other avenues such as ballot drop boxes and mail-in voting and things like that.
So, I would like to like make a proposal. Wondering if, we could actually, I don't know, what do you guys think? Jim, can you hear me? Okay. That we table this again, and have another meeting, I think even if it's this week, the end of the week, and invite LHS, someone from the Secretary of State's office, it's written down, and plaintiff's counsel. For the, to explore again, just to ensure that, and obviously Solicitor O'Connor, to come and basically have this meeting again with the folks that are in the room that know exactly that there's no other way that this can be done. So that I will feel much more comfortable when we, you know, vote in whatever way it is, that we have all of the information. And that's what I had requested originally. I understand that you spoke to them, Elliot, and I you know, I thank you for that. I would just like for the commission to be able to ask questions directly to the source. And then to also give another opportunity again for people to digest this information, because this was very great information that Solicitor O'Connor gave tonight, especially outlining the timeline.
Mhm.
Think about it and then come back, and then we'll have one last time to answer the questions, and then we'll make the vote. That's my proposal.
Okay, so I guess we have a proposal from Zoe regarding the meeting. Is there any discussion on it from anyone?
So that's the table, everything we've done tonight until the next meeting. Is that correct?
Is that
Pretty much just the table. I don't feel comfortable in our next, which is discussion to the motion for the reconsideration.
okay?
For us to talk about the, you know, polling locations outside of the district. And then the representative was unable to make it tonight, right? To even talk about the polling tax, because I have questions about that.
Okay,
So-
that's correct.
So yeah.
Okay, so I guess it's a proposal at this stage.
So I can say, I can make a motion.
So you're making a motion? Okay. So again, so motion by Zoe to table items 3A through 3D pending a meeting with LHS Associates or a representative from LHS Associates,
Secretary.
invitation to the Secretary of State's office and plaintiff's counsel and city solicitor.
Yeah, and as well as Mr. Pierce, I guess he's on vacation, but I think he was on earlier.
Yes, he was.
Yeah, so if he can make it again, I don't know. Okay, I hate to interrupt his vacation.
Okay, so I have a motion from Zoe. Do I have a second from anyone?
I'll second.
All right, second from Jim. Is there any discussion on the motion? Any discussion? Okay, hearing none, I guess what is the will of the commission at this point? Vote to approve. Okay, so I guess we have a vote on the motion. Oh, I'm sorry, Nate Priscilli just got dropped, so I'm admitting him back in. That's what happened. So I guess vote on the motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion passes 4-0. So I guess we'll reach out to the parties indicated, and you indicated you want a meeting as soon as possible, correct?
Yes,
So,
as soon as that,
Can,
you allow. As soon as possible.
okay.
can I make a suggestion?
yes,
If the chairwoman is looking to have the meeting as soon as possible, maybe say like Thursday, if that's, maybe for now, this meeting, there could be a motion to continue this meeting to Thursday at 5:30. And then if people can't make it, then the commission can be notified and decide to either cancel and then would get some dates if they can't make it Thursday. I suppose one question, particularly for the representative from the Secretary of State's office, if I'm wondering if, I mean, we want to do it at a time when people can, when the public can watch it and people are working. But I was just being mindful of also the fact that, I guess we'd be asking her to, well, anyway, we can do that. We'll check and see if 5:30 works for her or anyone else down there.
Okay, so solicitor suggested instead of motion for reconsideration not a motion for reconsideration, I mean, a motion to continue the hearing instead to Thursday at 5:30. Obviously pending availability of parties. Will someone entertain that motion or is it
Yes,
make the motion? Okay.
I'll second it.
Okay, so Zoe makes the motion instead that we will continue this meeting to Thursday at 5:30, under the terms indicated, seconded by Bev. Any discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. Any?
Aye.
No nays? Okay, so the ayes have it. So this meeting will be continued to Thursday.
Could I have,
5:30.
could I have one more thing? We keep hearing about the consent decree. I presume that is many, many, many pages long, and I don't want to wait through the whole thing. But I'd be interested in the part of the consent decree which required us to split up our precincts.
Sure thing, we can send
Know
that
where
out.
that is in the consent decree.
We can
Okay.
send that, we can send the consent decree out in its entirety and map off the appropriate language.
How long? Okay, how long is the consent decree in its entirety?
It's not terribly long. Yeah, but we'll mark off
Okay,
the salient sections.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, so having.
Oh, so-
Oh,
That's all for me, Madam Chair.
Okay.
So that's all for me, Madam Chair.
Okay, so I guess since this hearing's been continued, it wouldn't really be a motion to adjourn the meeting, but it'd sort of be just a motion to end the meeting at this point, for it to be continued on Thursday. So I guess, would anyone like to make that motion?
So,
Okay, motion from Zoe, is there a second?
again,
Second it.
Oh, okay, seconded from Bev. Okay, so this is a motion to just end the meeting tonight for it to be continued at Thursday at 5:30. All those in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay, hearing none, the ayes have it. This meeting is again ended to be resumed on Thursday at 5:30 at that time. So we end
Okay,
tonight at 7:03 p.m.
What are the legal requirements for announcing the continuation? I presume since under the open meeting law, I mean, do we have to re-announce it I don't know.
We will post it again, but the fact that at this public meeting, the meeting has been continued. And we'll post it on the election door and we'll post it out front. And again, for anyone who's watching it, we've continued the meeting until Thursday at 5:30.
So we're all legal. Good.
Yep.
Okay.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone, and have a good evening.
Good night.